here. We got a new show on the Cornhusker Connection Network. All things, all Big 12. I'm Brandon Shanahan. We got Dr. Drew Russell, Iowa sports broadcasting legend. 12 I want to get to, and we'll also break down all the matchups in week one. Should be a good week for the Big 12, and even throughout the non-conference, like a lot of Big 12, Pac-12 matchups, which I think are going to be fascinating.
They
So I'm
will
excited
be.
for that. But first of all, as one of the intriguing storylines to me is revolved around Iowa State and what that program looks like moving forward, especially with the updated sports betting allegations. And a lot of those players likely aren't going to be made available at any point throughout
Yeah.
their Iowa State career. How does that impact Iowa State? Are there obviously Hunter Decker is probably the big headline there, but how damaging is this to Iowa State at this moment?
Well, to lose a starting quarterback, even one that did have some consistency struggles last year in Deckers, is never a great thing. You lose a starting running back in Jalil Brock, who's fantastic. Lose a tight end. You lose a couple of key defensive guys as well. It's really going to be up to the mindset of that locker room. And what if the coaches can get that message across of, hey, we're moving forward. We've got a season to look forward to. There's a lot of, talent in this room, guys that we believe in, brought on campus here to compete at a high level. But it is going to be an interesting year because they've got a new offensive coordinator, which, Shieldhouse, I think, is going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. They promote from within. I also look at a team that defensively was pretty good last year. They were one of the best in the conference. In fact, I think top team in the conference when it came to lowest yards per play against. So Iowa State defense was pretty good last year, but their offense wasn't. But the key is going to be those guys in the locker room, because if they are mentally checked out, or if they feel, hey, we lost our QB or running back, it already feels like the sky is falling this season. I'm going to be brutally honest. The most important game of Iowa State's season, you might laugh at me, I think it's week one against Northern Iowa. As funny as that sounds.
It's a tough matchup.
It is a tough matchup, one, but two, if they come out, they play strong, and they look good, I'm not even remotely saying they'll have a winning season. I'm not saying that they're going to, find success, but it will tell me that this team is at least mentally engaged, at least from the start, which is going to be major. But if they look flat, if they don't do well, if they straight up lose, I mean, this season, whether you like it or not, has the opportunity to torpedo rather quickly, whether you like it or not. And it's up to all those guys in the locker room of, hey, we move on from this. We got a good group. Let's go forward. Or it could get rough. And, for Matt Campbell, he's done an outstanding job. Last year was a losing year, only his second one there at Iowa State. And he'll do everything he can, but this is something that is going to be kind of a cloud over the Iowa State program throughout the season.
Yeah, it sounds like the one thing that they have going for them is that we're obviously just hearing about all this stuff now as the local law enforcement's gotten involved. We haven't heard anything from like the Big 12 or the NCAA, but it kind of have seemed like this has been brewing for a while. Yeah. And like these guys were getting looked into for a while. And as these law enforcement investigations go, it takes a long time. And typically when you're the subject of one of these investigations, you know about it.
Yeah.
So it kind of seems like they've had a lot of time to prepare. Like it doesn't seem like they've had it doesn't seem like they're going to get caught off guard by any of these names. Like I remember it was a big fuss when Hunter Deckers didn't go to Big 12 media days, but obviously knowing what we know now, that makes a lot of sense why he wasn't there representing the Cyclones. But it is going to be fascinating to see what happens here, because there are some really serious allegations being thrown out as far as players. When sports betting gets kind of involved in our culture and in sports, you really, some of the biggest scandals in all of sports history have been revolved around gambling, whether it be Pete Rose or the Black Sox. And in Pete Rose's cases, he's the all-time leading hitter, and he's banished from baseball because he bet on his own team, which is still not even considered like the worst kind of violation. That would be betting against your team or betting something where you have more impact on, like some of these Iowa State players have been found to do. So, and to me, that seems a lot heavier of a situation than even something like paying players back before NIL, and
Yeah.
creates that kind of that horrible kind of sense of um, channeling or tarnishing the integrity of the game. And the NFL's come down so swiftly against players who have been involved
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form, hoping to get in front of this before any type of slippery slope gets involved. Where it seems like the Iowa State and Iowa players in general are already past that point. Well,
Yeah, it's interesting too because the state of Iowa, I mean, they passed the sports gambling law a few years ago. Potentially, you and I also took advantage multiple times, or maybe still take advantage of our beloved sports gambling here in the state. I picked nothing but winners, folks. But I will say that from a student athlete perspective, and I am curious for this from you, Brandon, because look, there's certain things that can happen on college campus. I mean, for a lot of these athletes, like you're 21, you're okay to drink for most state schools as long as you do it in a responsible manner. Shoot, certain schools now, hey, you can be on the coast or all that, wherever there's legal marijuana, and there's something along that nature that's okay if that's within the school guidelines. And look, gambling over the age of 21 for most or for some states is legal. And for college athletes, I think it is a pretty slippery slope, especially, their own team inexcusable, their own sport, major red flag, and anything within their university, not great either. That said, for me personally, I don't mind if they go bet on an NFL or NBA game. I'm curious if you think that, hey, if they're within the age limit, that it's okay, or do you think, hey, this is slippery slope, they're in sports, let's make sure that we're keeping this ethical and we're keeping this fair?
yeah, I think in a perfect world, it's very reasonable to set some guidelines and guardrails for protecting the sport. We're like, well, yeah, if a college kid who's riding the practice squad on a baseball team bets on the NBA, that doesn't affect anybody other than his own personal situation. But it is just such a slippery slope. Well, it's like, well, if you let these guys bet on this, what's going to stop them from betting on this? And then how do we enforce that? How do we get our eyes on it? Because the last thing that you ever that the most damaging thing that could happen here is the integrity of the sport getting questioned. And even if, and I don't think that any of these players have really. It doesn't seem like there's any evidence of that happening yet, but you kind of look at it and be like, this, we're not that far off from, well, there's a clip of one of the Iowa wide receivers falling down before getting into a touchdown on a game where he
Right,
bet
right,
the under. And I don't think that's what it is, but you think, well, you have that question, and that's so
right.
damaging. You have that question, and it's so damaging to the sport that I think you do really have to lay down the hammer here, and especially when it comes to school out in Eastern Iowa, they're really when they're betting on their own unders. You got to blow up that whole football program. Got to get rid of it. SMU's death penalty looks pretty light compared to what I would hope from them, but that's just my objective take.
To defend him, I mean that's a guaranteed winner last year.
No kidding.
I mean, that was a smart bet. I mean, if you're just looking at it from just the straight numbers, that bet made a lot of sense. But you're dead right. I mean, never on your own game, never uh, probably collegiate sports or anything along that nature. And yeah, if you open just that door a crack as well, even if it's a professional sports, I can kind of understand, why it's frowned upon. And you mentioned the NFL. I mean, Calvin Ridley, a lot of people were mad at the NFL they laid down the law on Calvin Ridley when he bet, and they said, you're not playing for the year. That's how it is. But one thing that all these people know is if they think there's gambling involved or tampering involved and it hurts the integrity of the game, that is clearly going to hurt trust, and it is going to hurt viewership and interest in that sport. And simply put, that's inexcusable.
Yeah, and to me, it doesn't seem worthwhile to even put put that thought out there and put that risk out there and unfortunately, because Iowa State's gonna probably get the brunt of this, um, you got to really whoever's going to come down and enforce this, which is still unclear to me. I I don't know if it's going to be the NCAA or the Big 12 or Iowa State internally, but you gotta nip this in the bud, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, you got to do it pretty swiftly and pretty significantly to hopefully deter this, because as great of a situation as it would be if we were able to be reasonable, that's just not how things operate, and like we said, the damage is so much greater than the potential to give these kids their freedom. And you could probably create some guardrails where it's just on football and basketball like the softball players can do whatever they want, or so on and so forth. But I'm really curious to see how this gets handled, because as of right now, it doesn't. It seems like everything's being handled internally by Iowa State, which good
yeah,
on them. They're taking this seriously, and they're looking to get ahead of it. But you got to imagine if it's a team down south or something, where a team has like real national title aspirations, and we talk about how program changing that
yeah,
is. If they kind of ran into the same kind of thing, where like, well, if the NCAA is not going to punish ourselves, not going to punish us, why would we
yeah,
risk all this benefit of having the successful season with this guy on the field?
yeah. We'll see if it's the tip of the iceberg because, rather bluntly, there's no way that for Iowa State and the team out east, that they're the only two schools that are doing this, like, or they're having athletes
Mhm.
do this. I have no doubt there is somebody in this country that's an athlete currently on an NCAA team that has probably been placing wagers at some point.
Mhm.
If there's not, hey, because you got me, congratulations. But I mean, seriously, I still think this is the tip of the iceberg, and whether how much digging is involved remains to be seen.
Yeah, and a fun little story back when this was getting kind of underway in the state legislature. I was working in the news department at our former sister station out east, and the local state representative that I worked with, or that I had to cover, was on the committee drafting this bill, and that was one of the concerns. Not so much this directly, but like, what are the unintended consequences of this? And you talked about how we had to really look at this from all angles, and to make sure that if we do move forward with this, and we do accept the benefit that this is going to bring our state, what could we possibly overlook that could be detrimental, and to kind of warrant offset some of those benefits? So shout out Joe Mitchell, Eastern Iowa State representative. I think he's still in the Iowa House, but yeah. So I've been around this since day one. The car that I have outside is partly purchased with gambling money. Shout out Tom Brady. Uh, so overall, like, it's very messy, and you're right. Like, there's no way that it would be very funny to me if it was just Iowa and Iowa State. Every other school in America is like, why would we bet on our own game?
We
Why?
would
That's
never.
so
We would
we
never,
would
sir.
never. But yeah, and luckily some of those guardrails that the state put in kind of makes gives you a little bit more accountability, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, this whole story and gambling situation is so far from over.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun though. Just I'm curious what programs or athletes, if it happens or when it happens, are going to be named, and what is that downfall, if any. I mean, shoot, North
Mhm.
Carolina took fate classes all those years, Brandon, and
Yeah,
I mean, guess that wasn't a big deal. So who knows? Who knows what's gonna happen? If if Kansas gets a violation in basketball, well, we'll just slap it on Tulane. They seem like a good candidate, so that's just how it is.
yeah, but like I mentioned earlier, this seems way more damaging than skipping class or fake classes, or even buying someone's mama house before that was allowed. Like, this seems way worse than that. But and I'm also curious, like, probably in the best universe for Iowa State, is they the NCAA or whoever is going to be involved in this and managing the sport moving forward, they figure it out. They do their whole investigation, and then they like, oh, this is way bigger than we could have ever imagined. So we're just gonna give everybody one freebie. That's it. Starting now, no more betting. Give the team out east a 5-year death penalty. That's how you know set that incentive. But everybody else, you're fine. Just we'll just pretend this never happened. But starting now,
Yeah.
if you do this, you end up like that team out east that doesn't get to play football for 8 years.
Boy, would that be? That'd be special. I'd feel bad for you know, certain families out there and certain sons who continue to get jobs despite barely scoring. Which, hey, I'm not complaining personally. I say that's a winning formula to me, or at least the opposing teams.
Yeah, you know you're a better man than me. I wouldn't feel bad at all. But there
Yeah,
are a lot of great great
I know.
storylines in the Big 12.
There are.
And so outside of Iowa State, is there anything in particular that you're looking forward to or excited to see how it plays out?
Well, Swan Song, I think for Texas and OU is fascinating. I'm curious. They've kind of had their exit tour, last few years now since 2021. Fan bases. I'm curious what they'll just come up with creative signs and stuff like that while they're on the road. So I'm curious. Texas, digging in. I mean, this is the first time that they've been picked to win the Big 12 in over a decade, which is kind of a stunning deal to me, just considering what they once were.
Mhm.
I am never going to be high on Texas personally, and you can call it bias. I don't care. But they've underperformed oftentimes. And like last year's a great example where they blew up the world when they competed extremely well with Alabama and frankly should have beat Alabama if they don't get a QB injury. They played pretty well. But to me, they kind of underperformed throughout the rest of the year. Steve Sarkisian, look, I'm not saying he's not a decent football mind. Texas expects wins. He's never had a winning or a double-figure winning season in all of his years of coaching at Washington, USC, and now Texas. So, look, they've got a lot of talent. The talent's not the problem. They've got the facilities, all that. I'm not all in on Texas necessarily winning the Big 12, and even though it doesn't make me ecstatic to say a K-State who did win the conference last year or won the conference championship, that's a program I think that is going to be really dangerous. I'm kind of curious to see if they can potentially continue to rise that program under Kleiman.
Yeah, it seems like there's two ways to think about how the Big 12 is going to shape up. It's well, I saw Texas compete with Alabama last year. I know I've seen Oklahoma compete on a national level for 7 of the last 8 years or 6 of the last 8 years, depending on where that bar is. So I think they should be up top. And of course, they always recruit well. They seem to always put guys in the NFL. But then you also kind of think, well, I also, and the other side of it is, well, I saw them play last year. I saw what Quinn Ewers looked like after the Alabama game. I saw him kind of hobble through that November stretch. I saw them not score an offensive touchdown against TCU. I saw Oklahoma have their worst season in more than a decade.
Yeah.
I saw, they lost their whole mastermind and Lincoln Riley, who picked up right where he left off out west.
Yeah.
I saw TCU have a really good run. They had so much more talent than anybody would have ever thought, just hiding in a mediocre Big 12 team ready to kind of come out. And Kansas State was awesome. Even backup quarterback Will Howard, when he came in for Big 12 champion legend Adrian Martinez, he played lights out throughout that whole season.
Yeah.
They lose Deuce Vaughn, but they bring back a lot of talent they're excited about. Jaden Daniels and Kansas looks like a real Heisman contender if they can win some games. So they're exciting. Texas Tech under Garrett McGuire seems to be getting a lot of juice, well earned. And there's just there's this whole other group of Big 12 schools that are going to be kind of vying for
Yeah.
that. And it just kind of depends on how you look at it, because you're right, the talent wise and on paper, Texas, this is going to be their best opportunity to win the Big 12.
Yeah.
But it's also I haven't seen it lately. And of course, Steve Shark has had to rebuild after some of the lapses from Tom Herman and Charlie Strong and all of that, which I get takes time to bring up to the level. But I also didn't take Lincoln Riley that long at Oklahoma, or didn't take
No,
Lincoln Riley that long again at USC. So you got to think, if there's going to be a year where Texas is in fact back, this is going to be the year for it.
agreed. Well, another storyline that's interesting to pivot away from Texas OU is how do the four new members compete? You look at the preseason poll in the Big 12, none of them are picked in the upper half of the league. UCF is the highest one at 8. And then the other three are, 11, 12, and 13. So what's interesting is anybody going to rise out of those ashes? Because, yeah, competition's going to be a step up. There's no question about that for those 4 new schools. But, BYU is a team that I'm kind of interested in personally because they usually play a pretty difficult schedule. They always do as an independent. And that'll be an adjustment. Even though they're in a conference, they're used to playing pretty good talent. I'm curious where they'll be. Central Florida is a team that on paper brings back quite a bit of talent. Last year under the OG Gus Malzahn, Arkansas hero, never forget. That man just absolutely lives life. In fact, Brandon, I doing some research on Gus Malzahn, I actually learned the OG's full name. If you would like to hear it, the man Arthur Gustavo Malzahn III. That is what Wikipedia told me. Learned it today.
That's so disappointing. That name is so much cooler than Gus.
So from now on this podcast, it's Arthur Gustavo III.
Arthur Gustavo III.
Malzahn
Outstanding.
Yeah, I know. Gus is pretty good. I thought Gus was.
It's catchy. It's short.
It's like an A- B+ name. You remember it, but then you hear Arthur Gustavo Malzahn III. I'll send you the link to confirm because we have nothing but accurate takes here. But
first, fast, and accurate. That's what we're all about here.
No question about that. But I do know this. How does those new teams compete? That's going to be really, really interesting to me because, again, they're going to have something to prove. And again, they've shown that they have had success in their own league. So how that pans out will be interesting.
Yeah, because I think, even looking back, it's kind of a interesting setup with them joining from Group of 5 to the power conferences, and I kind of look at a team like TCU, and it's kind of tough to compare because it's such a different day and age, and with the transfer portal, you can do so much so quicker. But they were real Mountain West powers. And now, even looking at their stats, I can't even believe it. It won 11 games, 12 games, 13 games, 11 games, won a Rose Bowl. Fun fact, also won more Rose Bowls than Utah, who have seemingly played in all of them the last few years.
Yep.
And then they joined the Big 12 with that same kind of team, same Gary Patterson. Of course, they lose some talent from that Rose Bowl team, and then they go 7-6, and then 4-8. And then they figure it out, and they go on that crazy stretch where they go 23-3 over 2 years. And and even as we're talking about them today, it's they're right in the thick of things. But it's how do those teams kind of suffer that same kind of transition? I think I think Houston's going to struggle quite a bit. It just doesn't seem like they have a great, powerful football program as is. I think that transition will be tough for them. I think Cincinnati, if they had Luke Fickell, I think they're in a much better spot than they are now. But I still think there's a lot of potential there. BYU has the facilities. They have the look of a real Power 5 team, especially. They I think more than any of these other schools, they just feel like the Big 12. Yes. And I think they'll fit in pretty well. And whatever their ceiling is, I think they'll hit it probably sooner than all these other teams. But overall, I would guess that UCF is probably the best built. They're already in a major recruiting hub, being in Central Florida. They do lose. They've done a good job of building up a kind of a new brand since losing national championship head football coach Scott Frost a few years ago. And they've done good to replace him with Mr. Gustavo. But with the facilities that they have, and Orlando being such a, you could sell young kids on Orlando pretty easily, I'd imagine.
Mhm.
Um, how fun
Oh
would it be if
yeah.
they started getting NIL deals from Disney?
I think it's not if, it's when. I'm going to tell you that right now. I mean,
That's
how could it
smart.
not be? That's an easy money opportunity.
But yeah, and we've seen them have sustained success. Of course,
Mhm.
that national championship season 2017, led by Scott Frost. But I think that they're going to compete pretty well pretty quickly. Again, whether or not that they hit their ceiling or not, that'll take some time, and they'll probably get some speed bumps along the way. But I think 5 years from now, especially with the new schools coming in, so because yeah, it's only going to be 1 year where they're the newest Big 12 teams, which is crazy to think
Yeah.
about. But I
Yeah.
think once you kind of mesh and kind of hit that reset button with this whole conference, I think they'll be in good shape.
Yeah. Well, and kind of my third and final thing, I think that's kind of an overlying arc this season is look, TCU is fascinating team to me because this team was just in the national championship game. They beat an excellent Michigan team in the semifinals last year, dominated throughout the Big 12 season, one play away from having an undefeated, regular season to get into the postseason. And they lose all their offensive starters pretty much. It'll be interesting to see what, their original starter last year, Chandler Morris, can do. Bunch of transfers at wide receiver. They got 7 starters back defensively. And do they continue to play at a high rate? I think they're going to take a step back no matter what. If they played another national championship game this year, you got me. You got me straight up. Or is it a situation where Baylor just a couple of years ago in 2021 had an outstanding season, won the Big 12, felt like things were on the up and up, and then they had a pretty disappointing 2022 year, and now is Dave Arnetta the right guy? Which I think he is. I think he's a pretty solid coach. But I am curious with TCU if they can continue to play at a high rate. And I'd say if they can get another, a not 8-9 win range, I'd say that's a very good year. I really do. But again, this is the world of college football. It is brutal, and you can be on the top of a mountain one year if you're a coach or you're a team, and not a simple 10 months later you're back in the valley. It is a brutal, brutal sport, and that level of winning is hard to produce. And I'm curious if TCU can continue to produce at a high level under Dykes.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see that. Of course, being in DFW, I've grown very fondly of the Horned Frogs, but I think if I'm going to try to sell you on TCU, it's well, yeah, they had all these NFL players on the roster last year, but they also had all those NFL players on the roster the year before. But the way that Sonny Dykes was able to come in, develop them, get them to play up to their ceiling, that's why this team competed on a national level as well as they did. So you still have Sonny Dykes back, and then you still have all this new talent that we don't know much about. Where we're in the same exact spot last year with TCU, they had all this talent that we just don't know about. And as he kind of hinted at here, and what gets thrown under the bus so often, Chandler Morris, the starting quarterback, was QB1 going into that season.
Right.
They had a Heisman contender quarterback on their bench, and then an injury comes through, and then Mad Max, comes alive for sure. And it was fascinating to see. I also bring that up specifically because there's also a narrative going around where every team that TCU played their quarterback got hurt. Like it happened, like Dylan Gabriel got his head torn
Yeah.
off, which was a bad and dirty
Yeah.
play. So,
Yeah.
that one's fair. And then uh, Big 12 legend Adrian Martinez went down early in that game. And a couple of Spencer Sanders also at Oklahoma State went down in that game late. But they should have just had Heisman contending quarterbacks on their bench like TCU did. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that's fun. If I'm going to sell you against TCU, I do bring up the fact that they lost so many talented players.
Yeah.
I also point to the fact that they lost not just a lot of talent on the field, but Garrett Riley, their offensive coordinator, is now at Clemson, and they bring back Kendall
Mm-hmm.
Briles from
Bryce, yeah.
Arkansas. Yeah, which by the way, side note, I think that's a crazy fit.
It
Like
is.
if
Yeah.
there's any school in America that is going to bring in a Bryles and their coaching staff. La, Last place is Baylor. I don't think they would ever do it, obvious reasons. But
Yeah,
TCU next up.
yeah, it's
Like,
right there.
so it's
But
crazy to think. But that
As Al Davis once said, you just got to win, baby, and that's all
just
they
got to.
want to do.
It was also so funny that around that same time, because you could see that because Clemson was super excited to announce Garrett Riley was there. They're proud of him. They had him come out during a basketball game. They're hyped. They post him all over their social media. And TCU posted one thing on Twitter, and it was a picture of him standing behind his family in the jet on the way to Fort Worth, using his children basically as PR shields, which I thought was so funny and so very clear. Like, we're gonna get torn apart in the comments section, so we're really just trying to soften that blow as much as possible, which is insane. But I think that's going to be a huge loss, huge gain for Clemson for sure. I think they're going to be right back in the playoff because of that. But that's a huge loss. I do think that I think it's more than fair to say they take a step back. I don't think that step back is very large, because what you do get in a good coach like Sonny Dykes is that it immediately raises the floor.
Yeah,
And kind of the formula for the most part to having a good program is you lower the floor right away. Then you hope that, at some point, all the stars come together. You have an experienced quarterback, you have NFL talent, and they all come together, favorable schedule. And then that's when you go 12-0, win a national or compete for a national
right.
championship, beat Michigan. But then you come back down to 8-9 wins, and rebuild from there, which I think is where TCU will be.
First off, how beautiful is college football that you can use kids as a PR shield, and even though you get ripped a little bit, it's just, well, that's just another day in the neighborhood.
Well,
Not even phased.
the narrative did shift a little bit. It went from hiring a coach who was associated with that horrible, horrible scandal just down the road in Waco, Texas, at our
Mhm.
rival. But then it went from, well, now we're mad at you because of how he did this PR wise and how you set this up. But so it did kind of shift the narrative. So I'll give him that.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, well, and from an Arkansas fan standpoint as well, yeah, it was a little weird. Kendall Briles said, I'm leaving, but I'm staying. Then he ended up leaving ultimately. So, you know, whatever is what I say.
And then, as our local Arkansas expert here, is this a win for TCU? It's because I also ingrained myself on Arkansas Twitter last year. I was a big fan of the Hogs. Went on a whole journey trying to pick a new college football team. Arkansas was up there for a while.
Yeah.
And so but I heard a lot of mixed reviews. A lot of people were like, "Oh man, this is a bummer." And people were like, "Yeah, good, get out of here."
Yeah, well, first off, full disclosure, Arkansas fans are the most legendary people of all time, but I'm going to be honest, we do tend to make quick judgments oftentimes, as do many SEC fan bases do. Bryles was really interesting because he has had some really good talent in that program. Their QB KJ Jefferson, who's back again this year, one of the best in the SEC, just a great player, top tier running back in Rocket Sanders, good, decent lines, some decent receivers. But yeah, sometimes the play calling felt off. There was some frustrations. Yet at the same time, there were certain games that they couldn't miss. I mean, they were firing on every single cylinder, and they still put together a winning season last year for an Arkansas program that was viewed as quite literally a team, the worst team in college football for a couple of years under that fraud Chad Morris as Dallas Fort Worth hero, I'm told. And he's a fraud to me. But Bryles, I think, was looking for a new start. I think TCU is actually it's a good fit for him. It's a team that's had success, but he's going to work with a brand new room. And we're going to see if they find some success. And sometimes a change of scenery is all a coach needs. Or, if you're at Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy, you just continue to grow that mullet out and just continue to live life by the horns and say, I'm not going to change. I am who I am, which he recently said. And we'll see how Okie State is this year as well. So change of scenery can be good. Sometimes it can't be. And we'll see with Bryles.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's tough to kind of decipher, because I feel like every college football fan base hates their offensive coordinator or hates their defensive coordinator. Um, So it is kind of tough to see how much of that is,
Guaranteed. Yeah.
warranted.
Yep.
But we do have football going on this week. By the time this episode drops, week 0 in the rearview mirror, we're week 1 here. And throughout the season, I like to go through week by week, put down our projections on paper, and come back next week and kind of, eat our feelings a little bit, see how that goes, for better or for worse. So some good stuff coming up this week. The conference play still a couple of weeks away, but some good games here. So we'll kind of just start at the top here. Kent State, UCF's Big 12 debut. Uh, do you have any polarizing thoughts one way or the other?
Well, I think for UCF and for every single newish team on the conference, everybody wants to start the season strong, but first impressions do mean something. So they're going to be looking to, rock and roll. And again, they've got some good players coming back, like their QB, John Reese Plumlee. I mean, good starter last year, a team that saw success. They've got talent like that. That's not no joke. And this feels like a game that Kent State, part of one of the great conferences in America in Maction, but a team that pretty beatable, and UCF, in my opinion, should take care of business. But a nice week 1 game, and it's definitely not a pushover in Kent State.
Yeah, I think this is one of those games where you kind of look at and you go, well, I'm just excited there's football back, but I do think that this game is not going to be a barn burner per se. I think UCF is definitely set up to win, and you got to think UCF for a good season. You got to feast on as much non-conference nonsense as possible. So you think you gotta get this one.
You have to. Yeah, you have to.
And I think that the same kind of thing goes for Kansas making their first bowl game in recent memory last year. You kind of know that, well, we got some freebies that we can really take advantage of here early on. Missouri State, one of them, good FCS program, but definitely it's got to be a win for Kansas if they're going to get to their goals and their total. So I think that's an easy one there.
Yeah, for sure. And what they've been able to build has been special. Jalen Daniels, I'm curious to see what he can do healthy. This was a team that got off to a 5-1 start last year. They were the toast of college football, rightfully so, based on historically how much they've struggled. So it will be interesting to see what kind of year they can have under Lance Leipold. I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm not a Kansas guy historically, but they're an interesting program. I've got Kansas as well. The Terry Allen football game, as I call it, former Kansas coach. He also coached at Missouri State as well. So there you go.
Absolutely. That's the insider knowledge that we paid the big bucks for.
That's right. That's right. That's why this show's paying my teeth, folks.
Absolutely.
That's why they take care of me.
Colorado TCU, the first big noon kickoff game of the year. I mean, this just makes my heart so happy. As a Colorado fan, I love it. Being on national TV as a newfound TCU fan, I'm excited. We talked a lot about TCU taking a step back. I think they do. And I think Colorado takes a huge step up as well. I don't think that that's quite enough to mend the gap here. I think TCU still wins this one, maybe not as comfortably as they did last year, covering that big spread, as I'm sure that you remember quite well. But yeah, I do think that they get it done here pretty solidly.
Yeah, TCU, this is actually a pretty good statement game for them for week 1 because Colorado has gotten a lot of headlines in the offseason, rightfully so. Coach Prime, he cleaned out shop. He's got his guys in there. I think this is a really good game for TCU because there's going to be hype behind it. We'll see. I think they hopefully can get a good crowd. I hope Fort Worth can show up and put together a big fan base for that day and create a pretty good atmosphere, which I think they will. This is a really good opportunity for them to make a statement early on and really kind of say to the rest of the Big 12, hey, we're still here. Just because you didn't pick us to win this year or even in the top 3, that doesn't mean we're gone. Like, this is just getting started. So I got TCU as well. But I think it will be closer than last year, no question.
I think so too, and you're right. Even if Colorado isn't quite up to the to the potential of what this Coach Prime era could be. Getting a game on national TV and that big noon slot is going to be a lot of eyeballs. So if they can come out look good, they're going to really turn some heads. Arkansas State, Oklahoma. I don't have much analysis. I think Oklahoma is set up to win here pretty well.
Yeah, I do too. Arkansas State, historically, though, pretty good team out of the Sun Belt. They've definitely had some success. They've had some coaches and players that have done some damage. But OU, traditionally, week one's kind of a cakewalk for them. They usually don't schedule too tough week one.
Yeah.
This year. Not really expected to be different.
Yeah, and I'm kind of looking at this whole slate, and I get pretty similar vibes to that pretty throughout. Should be a good week for the Big 12. What might be one of the more intriguing games, competitiveness wise, Iowa State Northwestern. As the Iowa State expert here, does Northern Iowa have much of a chance in Ames?
Oh, they've got a shot. They've beaten Iowa State a pretty good amount. I think 3 or 4 times the last 15 years or 20 years range. So Northern Iowa has oftentimes had Iowa State's number, and I don't care where Iowa State's at. They will always compete with them. A couple of years ago, Iowa State was a preseason top 10 team. Northern Iowa came to town, and Northern Iowa was in Iowa State territory for an opportunity to win the game week number 1. So they are always going to compete with them, almost always. I'm going Iowa State because I'd regret it if I didn't, but UNI, if I had to look at Big 12 slate this week from an FCS standpoint, who could potentially take someone out, boy, Northern Iowa is a pretty good candidate.
Yeah, I agree a lot. I think as far as, oh gosh, and I forgot about that game a couple years ago with Brock Purdy and Brees Hall.
It was
I couldn't believe what
tough.
I was watching.
It was scary. I'll tell you that.
I am with you. I do think Iowa State picks up the win. Pretty similar logic to Kansas. If they're gonna, push for a bowl game, this is one you got to get. You got to make hay while the sun's out. Northern Iowa is a good opportunity here.
Yeah.
Speaking of making hay, I think Cincinnati has a good opportunity to make some good hay against Eastern Kentucky. So I think this is a big win for them in their home opener.
I fully agree. And for, Scott Satterfield, first game coaching for Cincinnati, is an opportunity to make a statement and get some reps for a team that is going to be pretty young and have a lot of transfers coming in. So this will be a good game, and I got Cincinnati as well.
Yeah, roll Cats. Texas and Rice could be a good Texas State championship game. I think Rice is. Yeah, I got nothing. I think Texas wins.
I've got Texas as well. This is part of the old Southwestern Conference. This was once a big rivalry back in the 70s and 80s. And Texas, I think, should relatively roll, but Rice might have a couple tricks up their sleeve.
If I was going to sell you on Rice, I would sell you on the fact that Texas has a pretty big game in week 2 going down to Tuscaloosa. So if I think it'll be closer than people expect. Yeah, I think you catch them sleeping a bit. But I think the talent's just overpowering. I don't think it much matters. Kansas State, Southeast Missouri State, I'm assuming. Yeah, Southeast Missouri State, Kansas State, Roll Cats, defending Big 12 champs. I don't think they're going anywhere.
Yeah, I got Kansas State as well. But a big shout to Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Iconic town. Can't be beat. The Red Hawks are always chaos, so they're going to be trying to live in paradise in Manhattan, but they're not.
Absolutely. Speaking of specifically directional schools, Central Arkansas and Oklahoma State. I love Oklahoma State. I think that they're going to be a little bit better than a lot of people indicate. Now, I know that they're replacing Spencer Sanders, and that's a huge loss. But Oklahoma State seems to just do a good job of rebuilding with limited resources pretty well and developing into the high-end resources that now get to go transfer to Ole Miss and play backup quarterback.
That's exactly right. And Spencer Sanders, they lost quite a few guys as well in the transfer portal. And I know that's a common theme for a lot of schools. They lost 11 starters this year in the transfer portals from last year's team. So they definitely are going to have some new faces on the field, including at that QB position in former Texas Tech QB Alan Bowman. So that'll be I think pretty interesting to see how that plays out. Big shout to Central Arkansas as well. Conway, been there a few times. Iconic town, home of Scottie Pippen. Gotta love Pip. So you gotta
The
love a
Pit
Pip
Master. Let's
master.
go.
But Oklahoma State, I'll say wins a relatively easy rate.
So let's see here. If we're gonna have an opportunity to be somewhat bold, UTSA, great program last year, kind of knocking on that door to make the Cotton Bowl as the highest ranked Group of 5 team before stumbling late. And then we know what happened with Tulane. Houston kind of stumbling into the Big 12. What's your take here?
Yeah, this is a pretty intriguing game because you mentioned it. UTSA had a great year last year. Houston, no question, is going to have a few question marks going into this season. That said, I think it's going to be I'll say it's a one possession game. I'll say it's a one possession game. I'll say Houston finds a way at the last couple minutes, make a couple plays down the stretch. But I mean, this is an upset special. This game, along with that Northern Iowa State game, really piqued my interest as potential big time upset specials. UTSA will compete. They came out a winner. I wouldn't be shocked if I go Houston.
Yeah, just to play the game a little bit, I'll take UTSA.
There he is.
Yeah, if I got to make up a game later in the year, then I got to make up for it. But I think if there is going to be a team outside of one that I already have picked out here for as far as Big 12 losers here in Week 1, Northern Iowa is a good upset specialist. I think UTSA is also right there.
Yeah, it'll be. I'm looking forward to the game. I'm looking for all these games, but it will be interesting. I'll tell you what, if Houston lose that game, Dana Holgerson, he's gonna be wishing he's going back to West Virginia, go sing some country roads.
Absolutely. Texas State and Baylor, another Texas v Texas matchup. I got the Bears here again. Not a whole lot of analysis there. It's just everything Baylor has seems to outpower what Texas State has.
On paper, that that prediction makes a lot of sense. So I'm going Baylor as well, and I don't think it'll be too close, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, week 1, it's kind of designed to be kind of a tune-up game, and I think that's what's going to be the case here for Baylor. Also, that's going to be the case for Texas Tech. I'm really high on the Red Raiders this year. I was high on them last year. Beat Texas, if I'm not mistaken, so that's it. I mean, that's a successful season in and of itself. But I think the schedule also favors them a little bit better than it did last year. They had a couple real tough non-conference games that they just couldn't get through, and kind of stumbled in some winnable games that I think being under year 2 of the McGuire regime should be worthwhile.
Yeah, Texas Tech has never won a Big 12 title, and they've never even played in a Big 12 championship game, which is fascinating to me. This will be an interesting season. What a fascinating first week game as well. Going to Laramie, Wyoming, go play those Cowboys, go nuts out there. It's not an easy place to play, but I got Tech as well.
Yeah, good move. It is interesting. I didn't even notice that they're going on the road, but good on them for scheduling that home and home.
Yeah, these are the I'm not a big fan of the neutral site early season college football games, and I know that it is a destination deal. A lot of certain fan bases like it, but to put it bluntly, from a viewership standpoint, games are way more interesting if it's a home and home. Yeah. It's why Texas and Alabama was a big deal that they both scheduled home and home the last couple of years. That's something that just doesn't happen for either one of those programs, and that's what makes it really interesting. So, it's good for the sport.
Also, the interesting thing about Texas Tech is that, they've never won a Big 12 championship game, but they've also never been the worst team in the Big 12. It just seems that they're always within striking distance, always a high floor, low ceiling team. Power 5 matchup here, West Virginia and Penn State. I think this is I'm so high on Penn State this year. I think that they could even make a run for the Big Ten title. Probably don't quite get there, but I don't think West Virginia is going to be the team that keeps them out of the playoff. Give me the Lions.
No, it's West Virginia. They've got tough non-conference this year because they've got to play their hey, rival Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah,
And
backyard brawl, baby.
backyard brawl, one of the great rivalries. So that'll be big game for them too. Penn State's got a lot of talent. This isn't a Big Ten podcast. I won't dig deep into them, but big year for Franklin. He's got to, I think, prove some guys. Otherwise, Penn State's one of those programs not too patient. But I've got Penn State as well. But I'm all in on WVU. I hope they find a way.
Absolutely. You think they find a way?
They don't find a way. Let me make it clear.
Like,
they don't find a way. You were ready.
Man.
Yeah, he was ready to just mark that in there.
I was caught off guard. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think that would be a possibility. Wait, what? Okay. BYU, Sam Houston. I don't think there's much juice here. I like BYU. Sorry.
This is actually a tougher game than I realized. Sam Houston State is a power in the F. I mean, they've had a couple of years ago. I know they were in a national title game or all that. I actually think that they can compete with BYU, as wild as that sounds. And it might be a game they might lose by 50, but it's similar to picking an NCAA March Madness bracket, Brandon. I can't forgive myself necessarily if I pick it safe every single time. So I'm going Sam Houston State. I'm curious enough if they can find a way to get it done because they've got a lot of great talent on that program. BYU is, they're trying to kind of figure things out right now. Probably the lines will tell me this is a stupid mistake. That's why Vegas makes so much money. But it is, I think they can compete at the very least. And I'll take Sam Houston State. I wouldn't forgive myself if I didn't get nuts once.
I mean, BYU is only a 22.5-point favorite.
Right. So, yeah, I've got them right where I want them. That's how I view it. Yeah.
So that's week one. Not necessarily bold. I have UTSA over Houston. You have Sam Houston over BYU. Other than that, probably pretty heavy favorites throughout the board. But more than anything, I'm just excited for college football to be back. And week one means that it's very much back in full force. Obviously, a couple of games in week 0. Also, after the Nebraska Northwestern game, I don't think I'm going to watch any week 0 games. Per my therapist's recommendation.
Yeah, I remember. We're not going to talk about Ireland. Ireland, that's a country.
Especially any games in Dublin. That doesn't exist anymore.
That doesn't exist at all.
But fantastic.
It should be a fun season, though, Brandon. I got to say, I think Big 12 in that era transition, I think the games are going to be heavily contested this season. Not everybody's going to not play everybody, which I'll put it bluntly. We didn't talk about it earlier, but I'm a little saddened by that. I really like that round robin schedule, help create rivalries, help create familiarity amongst teams. I thought that was a lot of fun. That said, though, this new version of the Big 12 has got some juice in it. There's a lot of personalities across the board. This is going to be one hell of a season. I can't wait.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for us to come here, especially for the Big 12. Anything else you'd like to add here, DR?
Hey, I'll tell you what, I'm a long-suffering sports fan. Read the tag, nothing but accuracy always. I'll tell you what, I know Texas is the preseason media poll, but if I had to pick a team that's going to win the Big 12 this year, I'll go K-State. I really think they've got a lot of talent on that side, on the offensive side this year. A couple of transfers, I think, that can do some damage on the defensive side. They've got a good unit. Kleiman is a heck of a coach. Not a big K-State fan, but again, they're a good team. So I got K-State personally, I think, is going to win the Big 12, but we'll see.
Absolutely. No pushback here. Actually, I'm doing a project that's already on the YouTube channel by the time this comes up, where I go through every Power 5 conference and pick every single game for every single team. I haven't gotten to the Big 12 yet, but I'm very high on Kansas State. Without looking at the schedule, I think they have a very good chance to repeat. And I probably like them as much as anybody just because I've seen it. I saw it last year.
Yeah,
they were good. They're awesome. The guy Klein is a great coach, and Will Howard's fantastic. And I saw some things from Kansas State that I just didn't see from Texas or Oklahoma. So yeah, roll Cats.
I'm feeling good about the prediction until somehow Jalen Daniels just throws the Sunflower Showdown into just a whole different spectrum. So I'll feel good until, of course, that'll happen.
Yeah, great team, but they'll lose a couple of dumb games here and there just because it is what it is.